Well, as always, our band is great. And we just appreciate all that they do for us week after week. Every week it's like this. If you're new here, come on back. It'll be great again next time. I'm really happy that I get to introduce my friend to you today as our speaker. As you well know, in the path of our lives, we run into people who change us. They add color and dimension and wonder. They help us see the world a little differently than we would have. And that is just a great blessing of our life. And so it is for me with my friend Karen Blessen, her husband Kelly Nash. We've all been friends for about 15 years. Karen is an artist, a poet, a journalist, and for all of these things, she's received a number of awards and accolades that are impressive. In addition to that, though, Karen is two things: an architect of relationships. You'll hear about the things she's done with and for all kinds of people. And as I have often said back when I served on her board of 29 Pieces, she is a force. She comes up with an idea, and it will happen. Don't know what it will take, how long it will take, how many rocks we have to turn over. She is a force, and she is my friend, and I'm so glad that you will get a chance to hear Karen Blessen from Dallas, Texas.
Thank you, Charme, and thank you, Tom. Good to see Marcia again. Hi, Marcia. I'm going to be open today. I'm going to be open. Artists have to, if we're going to really mine this deep stuff that's going on, we got to just open up our chest and just open up our heart and just let it be out there. So I'm going to do that today. When Charme and Tom first talked to me, they asked me to talk about how I've taken my passion, turned it into compassion, and now into action. So we're going to talk about that. It's a bit of a story of magic, of alchemy, of taking times that are very quiet and listening, and a couple of really tragic and disruptive events that happened in my life, and it all has worked together. So I'm 64. I find the 60s really interesting. How many people are in their 60s here? Okay, so we have a few people. I find it really interesting. It's like this developmental time when you have had a few little slaps in the face, like, okay, I'm not 45 anymore. I'm not even 55. And so you have to decide: am I going to deal with it and really dig deep and find this resolve to go on and stay healthy and do the best I can, or am I going to just kind of fizzle out and let nature take its course? And so that's kind of where I am. It's also a point in life when I'm beginning to connect the dots, where it's becoming really clear to me that this happened, that led to this, okay, that led to this, and that led to now. So what is next? So Charme has called me a force, or a force of nature, and I think today I'll kind of unpack a little bit about where that force has come from. I'm from small town. I'm small town all the way. I'm a hayseed. Came from a small town in Nebraska and went to a Lutheran church that was didn't have Krista at my church. I would have come to church if I had Krista at my church. I would have come to church every Sunday. Didn't have you, though. So we were tough people, right? It's tough, the prairie. The people went through 2 world wars. They went through the Dust Bowl. They went through the Depression. They took care of one another. It was an all-white town. There were no people of other colors. When I was a kid, the big thing was you can't date a Catholic. God forbid you fall in love with a Catholic. If you marry a Catholic, oh my God, it's, there were no psychiatrists, but it was big time angst, right? And now I just got back from Nebraska last Wednesday, and I have a huge family. I have 53 first cousins. Can anybody Matt beat me on that? I have 53 very very productive family. And so I got together with about 14 of them or so, and now they say, I'm just happy if my kids go to church. So it's different. There are a lot of Hispanic people living in Columbus. There are a lot of African Americans. It's a change. It's changing everywhere. So my mom and dad had me late in life. My mom was 44 when I was born, and Dad was the member of the Greatest Generation. He was one of many small-town farm boys from impoverished families. He is a family of 11. A lot of stories about the travails of that family. He and 4 of his brothers went off to World War II. And like many men, and men who go to war now, he came back damaged and changed. We didn't have the word post-traumatic stress then. We call it battle fatigue or shell shock. He was on the front lines. He came back self-medicating with alcohol, chain smoking. His personality was very critical and cruel. And as a child, I kind of could understand, but I didn't really understand that. My grandparents lived with us, and so it was a very noisy household of 2 sets of adults and me. Well, one day my dad went off to Omaha, and he came back, and he was so happy, and he leaned down on the floor, and he opened up his jacket, and he had a tiny, beautiful Cocker Spaniel puppy. And that became my beloved dog, Pudgy. And Pudgy was a little light in this house that felt unpredictable and loud and angry. Pudgy was a little light. And my mother fell in love with him. My grandparents fell in love with Pudge. My grandfather went off to play pinochle every afternoon. And he came back and would give Pudge a tiny bit of a candy bar, and then he'd give me the rest of the candy bar. So we had Pudge. Got him when I was about 5. When I was about 13, it was on a winter day. At that time, people didn't have big fenced-in yards like we have now. And so people, I don't know if any of you remember this, we would just chain our dog up outside for a little bit, which sounds awful now. But at that time, it was normal. We'd chain him up for 10 minutes. He'd do his thing. We'd bring him back in. On that day, so Pudge was what, like 7 or 8 years old then. And Pudgy pulled out of the chain, and he pulled out his collar, and he was loose on a very cold winter day. And I found that, and then my dad went looking for him. And so I waited a while, and then I went outside to see my dad kicking Pudge all the way home. And my dad beat my dog to death in front of me. So that was the first murder. I was so frightened and so horrified, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't cry. I couldn't say, Dad, stop it, because I was seeing what I had always feared might happen, that his anger would be unleashed. And it was a terrible turning point for me in my relationship to him and for my mom. My mom was in love with this dog, and she went upstairs and sobbed for a couple of days. I never could get over it, really. And I have forgiven him because I know what he went through, and I know what brought him to that. But as a child, it made me full of feelings that I didn't like, of fury, hatred, outrage, anger, but I repressed it. And the next dot was, in repressing it, I went up to my bedroom and started making art. And that was the beginning, really, of my love of art, because it was a way for me to take all this unruly, chaotic stuff that was in my heart and my mind and just express something, just express it, just make things. Just the making of things was so what I needed at that time. I also began to see this in my town where I saw nobody who made a living as an artist. I also began to see this thing of creating things. It was getting a lot of good feedback. Oh, Karen, that's beautiful. How'd you do that? How'd you know how to do this? I saw this as, oh, okay, this is my ticket. This is my ticket out of here. This is my ticket to some place where I can be around color and light and people who aren't dealing with this stuff. People who have a bigger world vision. So, as much as I loved my mother, loved a lot of my cousins, my family, I wanted out. And I wanted out, and I wanted to get to the university where I wanted to be around artists. And so I did that. Got a scholarship, got awards as a college student, as a young artist, and I began to see that there are people who make living in art. I watched Sesame Street one day, and I thought, there are human beings back there doing all those little animated videos. There are human beings under those puppets, and they're making a living by being creative. And I thought, that's all I want to do. I just want to make a living by doing creative things. I'm going to figure out how I can do what I love, and people are going to pay me for it. I was very, very fortunate. Very fortunate. I met my sweet husband, Kelly, in college. We've been together for 42 years now. Through Kelly and a lot of other men, I've realized that there are a lot of good men. There are men who have not had to go through this kind of damaging experience that changes them, that makes it so difficult for those around them. So I moved to New York City for a little while and got an agent in New York City. And then Kelly and I moved to Dallas, and I just had this beautiful career. I was the first artist to win the Pulitzer Prize when I worked at the Dallas Morning News. I was a lead artist on the whole redevelopment of Times Square in New York City. From my studio in Dallas, I worked with the folks in Times Square on all of their banners, their advertising campaign, sides of buildings, you name it. It was very fun. It was very fulfilling. It was exactly what I dreamed of doing. And it was really answering my dream of just making a living doing what I loved. And then everything changed. 16 years ago on one August night, Kelly and I were in bed, and he was asleep, but I couldn't get to sleep, so it was like 2:20 in the morning. And I heard guys' voices. And it didn't alarm me because I thought, oh, the guys across the street are just bringing their friends home after the bars closed, because it was right that time. Then I heard a gunshot. And then I said, Kelly, you have to get up. And I went and called 911. And while I was on the phone with the operator on 911 saying, I think somebody's been shot in front of our home, I could hear pounding on our front door. And a young man yelling, open the door, my best friend's been shot, and I think he's dying. And the operator was yelling at me, don't open the door, that could be the shooter. It was not the shooter. By the time we were both dressed, we walked outside, and the ambulance and the police were already there. The fire department was very close to us. And we were there in time to see a young man who had already passed in our front yard. His friends were desperately trying to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Another man was leaning over them saying the Lord's Prayer. That when the ambulance and the police got there, they didn't even put on their sirens because he was gone. So we didn't know what happened. Within 2 days or so, the homicide detective came back and told us some of the details of what happened. The parents of the young man who had been shot, I was out on my walk in the neighborhood. I came home. They were standing in the spot where their son had been killed, and they just said, we need to talk to you to hear if our son suffered. And so we talked for about 2 or 3 hours that day, and I found out that he was one of 7 boys, and they were all big strapping basketball players. Turns out that it had been this senseless, foolish attempted carjacking. They had cut the car with the victims. They cut off in front of him. And the young man who was shot got out of the car thinking that he could defuse the situation. And the young man with the gun got scared and shot him in the back. And it was what the homicide detective said was like an unintended perfect shot that severed his aorta instantaneously. The detective said that he probably didn't even know what had hit him, that he was gone instantly. So this happened And so this was the second time that I had seen violence erupt, literally in front of me. And this time, I couldn't let it go. This time, history had repeated itself, and this time it was different for me, though, because I couldn't stay quiet. I didn't know what I was going to do, but what I did want to do, my curiosity was about what does that one violent death do to this increasing spiral of people that it touches. This murder got this much space in the Dallas Morning News. It was on a weekend, got barely a mention on one of the local news shows. And so my curiosity was not about who did it, because we knew that within 2 weeks, because they were not very bright, and they were on video using credit cards within 20 minutes of the murder. We knew there was no answer to why it was done, because it was just a senseless, stupid, impulsive act. So that didn't really interest me. What interested me was, how do all these people in this increasing spiral, how do they deal with it? And I talked to the homicide detective, I talked to the twin brother of the victim, I talked to the shooter, and he's in prison, I talked to the shooter's mother, and I talked to the fiance of the victim and the 2 young men who were with him that night. And it was a 3-year process of doing successive interviews to find out, how do you change as you begin to process this information? And what I learned is that there's no closure. It's a ridiculous word for this. There's no closure. People just learned how to go on living with it, with this information, and with this new experience that is in their life. I did a story for the Dallas Morning News that published almost 3 years to the day after the murder. It was called One Bullet. You can still read it and see it on my private website, which is KarenBlessen.com. It's called One Bullet. And it published, the news gave it huge cover. They gave it 3 full pages. And I was bombarded with mail, with emails, with letters, with people calling me saying, I've experienced this, my sister was killed, my brother was killed, my brother killed somebody and he's in prison. And you have said things in this article that we have not been able to say. And it immediately showed me just the magnitude of this net of violence that's over all of us, really. And we all absorb it in different ways. It turns into fear, it turns into anger, it turns into we buy a gun to protect ourselves. But I just could see this net over all of us of fear and anger. So I didn't know really, I'd had this career of my dreams, my beautiful little studio in my backyard. I couldn't go back to it, I just couldn't. And following up on what I'd experienced with my dad and that experience, I could not be quiet anymore. So Charme has talked about this force. Well, when you have 40 years of repressed anger and fear, that's a force. And that's a force. That's a lot of energy. That's a lot of energy to tap into. So there was that. There was also, I've always been a person of faith and connection with spirit, even when I've been one of the unchurched. I had a constant, strong connection to the divine, and I would ask for help. I would ask for strength. What's next? What do you want me to do? And I would say, Charme, what is it? Create me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. I was saying that verse a lot at that time. And I thought about, okay, I can't go back to my studio. Don't feel like doing that. I could work with people who were perpetrators of violence. I could work with people who were victims of violence and do something. Or what really captured my heart was to work with youth who were still at that very vulnerable point of, okay, I'm hearing all these messages that it's really, we like violence in our culture. It's undeniable. I liked watching Law and Order. I like watching Sherlock Holmes. We all like watching some violence. We like football, It's undeniable. It's real. How do we take all that energy and somehow rechannel it into, I'm going to use that energy to build and uplift and create and make things. And so I wanted to work with children. So we started a nonprofit at that time called Today Marks the Beginning, and it's now called 29 Pieces. Charme has been on our board. We have now worked with over 40,000 children using art to teach all kinds of people about nonviolence. And we, from the beginning, in talking to teachers, heard that it's not just kids in at-risk schools who are from chaotic households that need to learn about nonviolence. It's kids in affluent private schools where parents are paying $27,000 a year and their young girls are being bullied by other young girls. It's everywhere. And so from the beginning, we started working with Parish Episcopal, with refugee kids who had just arrived from refugee camps all over the Middle East, all over Africa, Thailand. And we started working with prostituted women who are trying to get their way off the street. We worked with pregnant and parenting teenagers, with kids in talented and gifted schools, with at-risk kids, with kids in juvenile detention. We wanted to work with as broad a spectrum as we could, using lessons that essentially teach love, but break it down into what we like to say is like palatable pieces of pizza or meatballs. Like, it's lessons about love, lessons about great peacemakers, where kids learn about other kinds of role models, heroes and heroines, where we start to define what makes somebody great, what makes somebody a peacemaker, what makes somebody heroic. And so now we've worked with so many kids. We did a project 3 years ago called the Dallas Love Project, and this piece back here, the Love is Power piece, is just one of those. It was done as a response to, how many of you know that Dallas was given the label City of Hate after the Kennedy assassination? Does that ring a bell to? Yeah? Okay, so we wanted to do a response to that because it was coming up to the 50th anniversary of the assassination. We worked with over 20,000 people aged 5 to 86 doing art that used quotes about divine love or agape from great poets, great musicians, great mystics, visionaries. And we displayed 10,000 pieces of that art in 66 locations along the Kennedy motorcade route in Dallas for 2 months during the time of the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. The mayor, we did a book, the mayor wrote the introduction to the book. The mayor referred to us many times when he was talking to press from all over the world about how this group in Dallas is showing that love thrives here. We're not a city of hate. So we're very proud of that project. Right now, we're working with kids from 4 high schools in Dallas with professional artists doing a 17-foot mosaic sculpture, and I have some photos of it back in the back there where this gentleman is standing. And it's based on a Native American passage called Let Me Walk in Beauty, and the line that's the subject is called Make My Hands Respect the Things You Have Made. So we've put together this collective of professional kids. We've paid the kids over $20,000 in scholarships to work with us, and we hope to be putting this up in July or August. Just we have a lot of stuff going through the city, red tape, but that's our hope. So we continue to move on. This force that Charme sees, a lot of it came from this personal repression of energy, but now it's much more than that. I mean, every day I'm asking God to bless me with stamina, with resolve, with wisdom, with strength, with deep love, so that I can, with health, so that I can continue this work as long as I'm meant to do it. Went to India a couple years ago, and this is a lifelong dream. I grew up, like I said, in this tiny town. We never went anywhere. But my parents, you could go to the grocery store, and for every certain amount you'd spend, you'd get a volume of the Golden Encyclopedia. And I loved those things. And in my little naive way, they were my window to the world because they had collages on the front. One of them had the Taj Mahal on the front. And I was like, that is awesome. The love story was so great, but the architecture looked so beautiful. And so finally, at the age of 62, I finally did my dream trip to India and spent about 3 weeks traveling around northern India. How many of you have been to India? A lot of people have. Well, I completely fell in love, just lock, stock, and barrel, fell in love. I fell in love with the architecture, with the beauty of the people, the color. I also saw the depth of the need that so many people have there. And I came away with an epiphany, and I thought, this thing that I've done with so many other people has been my path. And as I connect the dots, I was like, this was an inevitable path almost for me. But my epiphany was that really, that all of us have the potential in every moment to birth greatness into the world by every interaction we have with each other, by every choice we make. Are we caring for this person, or are we trying to tear them down? And so I came away with thinking that, wouldn't it be amazing, wouldn't it truly be possible that this world would be a better place if all of us in our own circles, small, large, whatever, were kind to each other, were loving to each other, took care of one another, so that we could create a world where children and puppies and elephants and flowers are cherished, and where no one, no father, no young man, no young woman, no one has to resort to killing someone to release their pain and anger. So I really want to thank you all for having me here today, and I'll be around to talk if you'd like to talk anymore. Thank you.